All right, we're ready to go. It's broadcasting now.
Great.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. Good evening and welcome to the May 19th, 2020 Council Committee meeting. My name is Mike Kimling. I'm a council member from Ward 2 and serving as the council president. I'll be chairing this meeting. Besides myself, the committee members present or participating remotely are Tammy Thomas, Ward 1, Matt Zimmerman, Ward 1, Eric Jenkins, Ward 2, Lisa Larson-Bonnell, Ward 3, Kurt Knappen, Ward 3, Lindsay Constance, Ward 4, and Jill Chaffee, Ward 4 as well. As far as the meeting goes, council's aware, please use the raise hand. Please stay muted till you're called on. As far as the COVID-19 situation, we're reducing in-person attendance when possible. If you'd like to communicate with your elected officials, use the email governingbody@cityofshawnee.org, all one word. There are 2 items on tonight's agenda. Item 1 is an overview of the 2020 revised 2021 budget process and revenues. City Manager Sunderman will introduce the 2020 R/2021 budget process, and Assistant City Manager Guard will provide an overview. Finance Director Cobby will review revenue collections. Go ahead, Nolan.
Yes, thank you, and appreciate the opportunity tonight as we kick off our 2020 revised and 2021 budget process. Really just want to thank you guys for taking the time, and as we go through this, we'll have kind of multiple budget committee meetings and kind of focus on different topics as we roll through the budget process. Again, if there's any information or you want to meet separately, I'd be more than happy to meet with you and take a look at any information or questions you may have. So I really kind of wanted to, I guess, kind of take a little bit higher level view as we kind of kick off. And so Caitlin will kind of start into kind of a budget 101 process for the few of you that have been on the council a number of years. You know, it's probably old information you're aware of, but just kind of wanted to set the stage and give some definitions. As you know, sometimes we can start talking in acronyms pretty quick and kind of reference certain funds, and really just kind of wanted to give everybody kind of a baseline information, and so kind of give you a little bit of a backdrop as we go into the budget process. So want to thank Caitlin and Don for doing the presentation here tonight, and you know, the next item will be the CIP as Doug and Matt and Lauren dig into that. I want to thank the management team for all their continued work on the budget as we work to refine that and continue to present you all information in kind of this ever changing and unique environment situation we have this year. So again, thank you all for your support. And again, don't hesitate to reach out with questions. And with that, I'll turn it over to Caitlin. Thank you.
Thanks, Nolan. As Nolan stated, we're going to take a few steps back here. We have a few new council members that are going through their budget process for the very first time. And it is always a good idea to kind of take that high level step back and just a general overview look at what a municipal budget looks like and what it is and what you're going to expect over the next few months. As our timeline kind of continues, the budget is due by the end of August, actually August 25th, to the county. So we'll be hopefully wrapped up quite a few weeks before that. But this is just kind of the kickoff to that and what that looks like and just that high level overview. And as Nolan stated, then Finance Director Cobby will dive a little bit deeper into our revenues, especially what those look like during COVID and then post-COVID, and kind of where we budgeted last year and what our expectations hopefully are moving forward over the next few months. So when we talk about the budget, there's 3 kind of bigger aspects of it. The primary factor that we're going to talk about over the next few months is the general fund. That's the fund that we spend and operate most of our operations from, and where we do a majority of our expenditures. So most of our departments are budgeted out of the general fund, and most of our expenditures are out of the general fund. So when we generally, we're using that word a lot tonight, but when we generally talk about the budget, it's probably coming from the general fund. If we're not talking about the general fund, then we're either talking about special revenue funds, which are those funds that have revenues from different sources other than our property taxes. So those may be specific sales taxes or part of our property tax that go towards specific items. Examples of those include our public safety equipment fund, so where we buy our or where we finance our fire apparatus, or where we purchase our police vehicles from. Also, one that we don't talk about too much is our cemetery fund. So we do operate a few cemeteries. Neil does a great job with that. And so we have obviously some operations there, and some other ones like our equipment facility reserve fund and just how we manage our facility and equipment replacements. And then kind of our bigger topic when we talk about our budget is our debt service fund. And this is where we're going to have our long-term debt and our long-term expenditures for that debt. That's primarily for our capital projects that Matt and Lauren are going to talk about in our next presentation. So just high-level overview of when we say things like general fund or special revenue funds, that's kind of what we're talking about. Obviously, we'll go into much more detail on these over the next few months, but just I wanted to give you kind of a summary of what those terms mean before we move forward, because you will hear about them in the next presentation as well. So when we talk about our budget, the first question is asked is, how is our budget funded? So every year, staff is going to provide the governing body and our residents a budget in brief, and so that's where this is snipped from. So this is our 2020 budget in brief, how our budget is funded. So the approved 2020 budget, we had $84 million in revenue. 53% of that was sales or other taxes. Don will talk about what those other taxes are here in a little bit. And then our second biggest revenue source is our property taxes. We will talk about how that distribution is going to change just a bit over the course of this year as related to COVID. But as far as our 2020 approved budget, this is kind of where we're sitting. We have some other revenue sources that are relatively small in relation to those two primary sources, but we'll go over those here in a little bit. As far as our sales tax breakdown, this is a really big conversation that we have. Generally, in Shawnee, our sales tax rate is 9.6%. There are a few exceptions, including our CID areas like 10 Quivira, but generally, if you're shopping somewhere, you're going to have a sales tax of 9.6%. A majority of that goes to the state of Kansas. So 6.5% out of the 9.6% is going to go to the state of Kansas. And then you can see a breakdown of that sales tax here and where the remainder of that goes. So 6.5% goes to the state of Kansas, 1.475% goes to Johnson County, and then the remainder there goes to the city. We do have a 1% general sales tax, followed by specific sales taxes dedicated to certain funds or certain projects. So our Parks and Pipes sales tax, which is 1.25% split between our Parks Department and our Stormwater, and then also our Public Safety sales tax. And our newest sales tax implemented in 2015 is the pavement sales tax. And Matt and Lauren will talk about a little bit more about that during our CIP presentation. But that all adds up to 9.6%. So like I said, generally when you're shopping in Shawnee, that's what you're going to spend on sales tax. But when we talk about that, a majority of that doesn't come to the city. It goes to the state and to the county. Our next biggest question is our property tax breakdown. And when we talk about property tax, we're talking about the mill levy, or the rate at which your property is assessed. And so 1 mill, when we're talking about mills, 1 mill is $1 per $1,000 of assessed valuation. So you can see our comparisons here. We like to give comparisons of kind of our core cities here in the metro. So that's going to be Leawood, Lenexa, Olathe, and Overland Park. So when we're talking about where the county sets our mill levies, and as a reminder, the county sets the mill levy. The city doesn't set a mill levy. So when the county sets our mill levies, here is where they're set. Shawnee is at 26.625 mill levy. You can see we are a bit higher than some of our peer cities, so we are not the highest. And when we talk about that property tax breakdown and where, kind of how you come up with your property tax based on your home or the value of your home, we're going to give you an example here. This is an example of the average home value in Shawnee. So you take that value of the home and you times it by the rate at which the county assesses residential properties. So that rate is 11.5%, and that's going to give you your home's assessed value. You take that value and you multiply it by the city's mill levy rate, again, which is set by the county, and that's what you're going to pay in city property taxes. So the example here, the average value of a home in Shawnee is $278,294. You multiply that by the rate at which the county sets the residential value, and you get just over $32,000. And you multiply that by the city's mill levy rate, so that home will pay $852 per year to the city for their property taxes, or $71 per month. That was a lot of math. Are there any questions before I move on?
I don't see any hands, Caitlin, so go ahead.
Thank you. So this breakdown here is almost a similar comparison to when we talk about sales tax. It's where our property taxes go. So when we pay property taxes, we don't just pay it to the city. As you can see here, a primary, almost half in one school district and almost half in another school district of every dollar you pay in property taxes is going to go to the school district. So based on where you live, if it's the DeSoto School District or the Shawnee Mission School District, you're either going to pay 50 cents on the dollar or 45 cents on the dollar to the school district. The next biggest chunk of that does go to the city. So based on the school district you're in, goes to the city. But again, that's almost a quarter of every dollar. And then the remainder is distributed to the county, Johnson County Community College, Johnson County Parks and Recreation District, Johnson County Libraries, and then a very small portion of that goes to the state. So again, we're going to, when we're talking about our budget process, we hear a lot that my property taxes go towards this or they go towards this. I want to reiterate that at least half or maybe just under half really doesn't even go to the city. It goes to the school district. Obviously well deserved, but what we're doing here at the city and how we operate our departments and how we operate our programs is based on a quarter or less of the property taxes that are paid. And here, these are our other miscellaneous revenues. Like I said, they're small potatoes when in relation to our sales tax or our property taxes. And so those are our motor vehicle tax. Those are counted within our property taxes, so we don't kind of see that breakout every year. But those are paid on an annual basis based on your vehicle registration. And then also our franchise fees. So a franchise fee is any utility that operates in our right-of-way pays a franchise fee of 5% of the gross receipts from their commercial accounts. So that would be our electric or our telecommunications are our primary examples of that. Additionally, we do receive revenues from our court fees and fines. So those operating out at the Justice Center in our municipal court have fees and fines based on their services, depending on whatever the situation is there. And then also we do receive some revenue from the state gasoline tax, and that does go towards our mill and overlay program, as Matt and Lauren will speak to in a little bit. We talked about our revenue and where that comes from and kind of how that's how we calculate that. Now we can talk about how we spend that revenue. You can see here we break it out by function. So our public safety function spends most of our budget. So that public safety is our police department, fire department, and our municipal court. Spends about 37% of our budget. After that, it's our public works department managing our capital projects, about 32%. And then the remainder from there is distributed. And I know probably everybody on this call has seen our organizational chart, but I just wanted to remind everybody on the council committee, we do provide a lot of programs and services, and sometimes maybe these aren't at the forefront of what we're talking about, but we do have a number of programs, services, employees that do a lot of work in the background that may not be a forefront, but a lot of our dollars and expenditures go towards all of our programs. And I just wanted everyone to be aware that we have quite a large organization kind of across the board and where those expenditures go to. So with that being said, I can go over the timeline of the budget. I think at the end of this presentation, Nolan will go back and give more specifics. But kind of how this budget process works is non-COVID years. We're trying, we actually are on a really good timeline right now. We are a couple weeks behind normal schedule, but it won't delay us any. The departments prepare their budgets in really February, March, and April, and then we take items to the council committee. So this being our first council committee meeting, talk about our revenues. Like I said, Matt and Lauren will talk about our capital improvement program. And then at our next meeting, you will hear from our department heads and how they're proposing to expend their budgets for the 2020 revised and the 2021 budgets. And then we'll also talk about our future service goals. And while this may not necessarily be a year where we can move forward with a lot of additions to our budget, that doesn't mean that we don't have needs in our organization. And moving forward, what are those needs and how we can prioritize those? After those May committee meetings in June, we'll hear from the Chamber and the SEDC, and then also our Visit Shawnee groups, as we do have partnerships with them in our budgets. And then we can have some wrap-up conversations. From there, the council will establish a budget limit and set the notice for public hearing late June, and then early July, hopeful to hold those public hearings and hopeful that the council will adopt the budget. From there, like I said, the budget is due to the county and the state August 25th. We're usually wrapped up quite a few weeks before that, but we do give ourselves some leeway time. We always like I mentioned, we always like to have some core city comparisons. So like I said, Leawood, Lenexa, Olathe, and Overland Park, what their populations look like and what their budget look like, and then also where their mill levies are set. So although we do provide a lot of similar services, we provide a lot of different services as well. Like, for example, the city of Olathe is almost a full service city, provides solid waste, et cetera, maybe some utilities as well. So it's not a direct apples to apples comparison. And there are a lot of differentiating factors. I know for a long time we've talked about the amount of commercial development within these other cities versus that in Shawnee and what that looks like and how we're trying to increase that. But we always like to provide this as an example just to kind of show the baseline of where Shawnee is in relation to our neighboring cities. And with that, we like to break it down kind of a little bit further. We like to show not only in Shawnee do we have a really amazing staff and we do a lot and we all wear a lot of hats, but just to kind of across the board show what it looks like based on our employees and how large we are and the services that we still get to provide. So you can see here that it shows that our employees per square mile is much lower than our neighboring cities and our core peer cities, just to show that Shawnee does a really amazing amount of work with maybe not necessarily the same amount of staff as our peer cities. Same concept when we talk about employees per thousand population. We are the lowest almost in the metro. And when we talk about the number of staff we have, it's kind of the same conversation when we compare ourselves to these other cities. And again, in expenditures per capita, we do these comparisons just to show you where these other cities are standing and how Shawnee, we really are frugal and we do the best we can with what we have. And I think we provide amazing services with the expenditures and the revenue that we receive. And again, expenditures in millions per square mile, kind of the same story again. Shawnee just has less expenditures per square mile. Just a lot of that has to do with the revenue that we receive. And so just wanted to show that comparison as well. So with that being said, I can turn it over to Dawn. I'd be happy to take any questions. That was a lot of information. I know high level stuff, but I'd be happy to answer questions before I turn it over to Dawn.
Yeah, it sounds good, Caitlin. I see a couple hands up, so let's start with Tammy.
With regard to the number of staff per citizen data, how many of our surrounding cities contract similar services that we contract out? So like mowing, facilities, some of the facilities maintenance and that type of thing. Those, in some cities, they do that from within. However, we do not. So I want to make sure I understand correctly that although we need that service, we're farming that out, so we don't count that. Whereas other cities have the same service, but they just employ people to do that, correct? And how many of those
That'd be
cities do that?
Sorry to interrupt. I would agree with that statement. I came from the city of Lee Summit, and they just had a different philosophy on having staff in-house versus contracting. And there are pros and cons to that, which I know that we can discuss at length for a number of hours, just depending on what service it is, what the expectation of service level there is. There are a number of different factors we can discuss. But you're right, the philosophy of those governing bodies and what level of staffing they want to hold based on the services they want to provide. It's a different philosophy in almost every organization.
Okay. I just wanted to make, just make that statement. It's not that we're doing all of these things with less people. We're contracting those services out, whereas others are holding that within their organization. And that's the only thing I wanted to add.
All right, thank you, Tammy. Jill, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Thanks. I had a quick question, Caitlin. When I was going through the packet, I was looking at page 18 where you have the core city budgets listed, and not knowing that it was coming later on page 21, I was curious. And so I did the math to see what each of those cities spent per citizen, but it didn't match up with the expenditures per capita that followed on page 21. So I was, again, looking at 18 where it says core city budgets, and then 21 where it says expenditures per capita, and it wasn't quite exactly the same. So I just wondered if you could maybe allude to the difference there.
Thanks for pointing that out. That's something that I'll have to go back and look at. Those should be matching up. So that's something that I'm going to have to look in on the background. So I do apologize.
Can I, is it because one of them was divided based on our budget and the other based on expenditures? I believe I asked that question.
I don't want to tell you yes, because I don't want to be wrong, but easily I'll find that out and I can send a note to the group.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thanks.
And for the record, that was Lindsay Constance that added the additional information question.
I apologize. Sorry.
No, you're fine. You're fine. Just want to make sure we had that recorded. All right. I don't see additional hands, so let's go ahead and proceed with the presentation.
Thanks. I'll turn it over to Dawn.
Thank you, Caitlin. A couple of things before we start out. As you can see, we'll talk about a new budgeting philosophy, but I wanted to reiterate probably things that Nolan said, but this is obviously not a traditional year. So not only it being the first time of me doing and kind of leading the charge on this budget and doing revenue estimating, we're also dealing with new software, a new auditor, and quite a bit of changes going on. So some of the things that I probably would have normally, and I hope to in future years, bring to you at this phase in the budgeting process, we're just unable to because things have changed so radically. At the same time, when we were reviewing this the other day, I made the comment that this isn't my first time dealing with something like this. It seems, some people say unprecedented, but I started as a city manager on August 2001, and so walked right into 9/11 and the internet bubble bursting and the resulting crisis after that, as well as living through the recession in 2007 through 2010 and some of the things that brought along. So I've been doing revenue estimating for 25 years. While everyone is different and everything, we had internet, we've had property taxes. This one is a sales tax driven and income driven change or cliff, I guess, that we've gone over. We still have done a lot of good things. And one of the reasons I was very interested in coming to Shawnee was the good financial position the city is in. And I can't tell you how many times I've stood in front of a elected body and talked about why we need reserves and people wanting to know why we need reserves. And it's times like this that it just makes it really simple to explain that this is why you're in that position. It doesn't seem like government funding can go away quickly, but it absolutely can. So with that as an overview, I'm going to hit some high level topics first before we get into the details of this year. The first thing is a new budgeting philosophy. When I was brought on board, and one of the things talked about was that when we looked at our 10-year financial plan, if you in the old budgets, if you followed it out, we got into negative numbers, negative ending balances in the out years, so 5-6 years down the road. And while that is easily explained by the process and the way we budgeted, which was creating more room for contingencies within the budget, at the same time, it's really hard to build a good financial plan over time without getting that budget living within its means. So one of the first things that I did beginning late last year and beginning of this year, calendar year, is to work on bringing that budget back to a balance for 2020. So although you passed a budget, internally, where were those contingencies happening within the budget, and how could we show that going forward? So next slide should show you a picture of that, of that exercise. So for two things to note. Number one, when we put the 2020 budget together, we had we estimated a beginning fund balance of 19 million, and we actually had a beginning fund balance of 25 million. Some of that is going to be exactly what you see at the end of this, which is we always show that we were overspending and then managing to the point that we were typically underspending or we had more revenues than expenditures every year. And so our balance would swings fairly dramatically. So a 30% fund balance for 2020 budget, but when we bring it back to a balanced budget with the target, it's about a 45% ending balance. And that is generally where we have been for the last few years, is in that 45% range. The exercise that I did was really targeted on the contractual services or services that we purchase through contracts, whether that's like we just talked about mowing, or whether it's paying attorneys, consultants, any kind of general service, janitorial, those things are all within the budget. And then the commodities that we buy, and a lot of that, and you'll see the large numbers in public works and parks, culture and recreation is parks. There's quite a bit of materials in those budgets, and we budget for the worst case scenario and have been for several years, and then typically underspend that by a large amount, almost $1 million that we were able to take out this year. And I think we underspent by even more than that last year. So the goal of this is to be more in line with what we bring in, what we expect to actually spend every year, and to try to manage the budget within a balance going forward. That way, if we have to make major revenue changes, then we would at least be able to show where those expenditure changes are going to be, and not, or if we purposely dig into the ending balance of the budget going forward, it will be very apparent that that's what we're doing, and will show going forward. I would also note that when we talked to the raters during the bond rating process, both rating companies seized on the fact that we were showing negative balances in the out years. That was something, again, we were able to explain away and had a track record to show it, but it isn't something typically from a financial planning and financial presentation that you would want to be showing to bond rating companies or future investors, maybe even in things in the community. So all those things said, that is the reason for this process. Here, just specifically, you can see that we were able to identify about $2.2 million in expenditures that we were able to reduce in the targeted budget and have a fairly balanced budget, only 58,000 to the negative. So the ending balance actually increased between savings in the previous year and the $2.2 million we were able to reduce gets us to about an $8 million difference in the ending balance, and where we're starting this process from for 2020's revised budget. Okay, sorry, Caitlin, go ahead. So with that, we'll talk about the revenues in the budget, and let's go straight to the general fund. Last year, in 2019, we had sales and use taxes were actually slightly below budget overall, about $60,000 from the revised budget. Property taxes came in slightly over 1.5% or $300,000. And then the other revenues in the general fund, and that's everything from franchise fees. Well, I can tell you actually what caused that. The reason for that number going up was investment revenue. Our investment revenue was about 4 times better than what we expected. We were able to hit the market pretty well and get idle funds invested at some pretty attractive rates, which obviously don't exist right now, but we were able to take advantage of a good market, banking market last year to the tune of about $500,000 in the general fund when we normally have about $180,000 to $200,000 investment revenue. So that was really the reason the other revenues ended up ahead of where we normally end up. Expenditures, as I just said before, we underspent by $5.2 million. Most, I would say $3 million of that, maybe a little bit more, was our typical underspending. And then about $2 million of that was, I think, the result of holding back and doing some things purposely that we did about the time I showed up in September, sensing that sales taxes were down and not knowing that we were in a decent position on the revenue side. And so we made a few changes and pushed them off into 2020. So that's the reason we were under budget by such a large amount for this year. Again, we ended the year at 46% of revenues, which is about where we were for the last 2 years. All right, next one. And since sales taxes are largest, sales and use taxes together are our largest source of funding, I wanted to point out a couple of things. The first is that when you look at our budget last year, the first 3 columns that in each grouping for each month are 17, 18, 19, and it's not at 0. It goes from 2 million to 3 million. So we cut off, so it'll look more drastic, but that way you can see the movement. It shows what we actually collected, and then the pink or the far right of those groupings is where we expected revenues to be. And if you look at that through the first 3 or 4 months of last year, we were definitely underwater. We were not performing very well. And it wasn't until July, or actually in September is when we got the money, but July is when it's recorded for actuarial basis. Then the revenue started looking better. And then you can see from there, we were at or above the estimate for the rest of the year. The next slide will show you why. So it makes things look, okay, we did all right. The next slide tells a little bit different story, which this is just the sales taxes. So not only the sales tax that we as a city collect, but our portion of the countywide sales tax. And when you look at those taxes, you'll see that we were pretty much under. So the yellow column and the pink column, yellow column is almost always under the pink column all the way through the budget, meaning we were under the budget fairly regularly by the tune of a couple $100,000 some months to maybe as less than maybe 50,000 in a couple of the smaller ones. And we were constantly running under budget. And one of the reasons I think everybody was worried coming into the mid-year and when we did the budget last year. The next chart will show you that it is the use taxes were actually better than the projected budget. So it's not always, use taxes aren't as predictable or as constant. They don't have the same natural curve and flow that you can see with sales taxes from year to year. But use taxes outperformed the actual sales taxes over the year, or the estimated, use taxes over the year, to the point that December's, which was collected this February because on last year's books, was $100,000 over what the estimate would have been, what we normally would have expected. It's for that reason that we only ended up just that small percentage under our estimate last year. The use taxes made up the gap of what the sales taxes were down. And that's important to point out because it does point to a couple of issues in our economy, our local economy, but also how we collect taxes. The first is that our sales tax locally, what we collect within the city limits, has been a little more constant and a little bit easier to follow, and has shown small growth. The county, our portion of the countywide tax has dropped. And so the county has seen not very strong growth. And then our percentage of that, which is done by a formula, has also contributed somewhat to how much we collect out of that. Both of those things have dropped and are making us run slightly under what we would normally expect with the growth in the economy. So the next slide, I believe, Caitlin, is this will show you, this will give you an idea. Knowing that information that you have on the sales tax and knowing what we've been given from the county, we saw in 2020, we saw about a 4.8% growth in assessed valuation and about 5.6% growth in the tax levy. We saw a 4.1% growth in the motor vehicle tax, and then, those two were, the first two are certain because they're based on final valuation. We are expecting, based on some of the preliminary county numbers, to be about 4.1% growth this year in motor vehicle tax. I think if you look at where we're actually at, we're closer to 6% right now. But now that the way people are paying their motor vehicles taxes is behind, and the counties reported they're about 30% behind where they expect at this point. I think that was the number. We moved that back somewhat from a timing issue and somewhat not understanding how that kind of glut of renewals and the lag in new vehicle purchases will drive our motor vehicle tax for this year. So if you look at city sales taxes, city use tax, last year in 19, we grew by 0.1% or negative 0.1%, but our use tax grew by 0.5%. These are definitely not right. I can just tell you right now, that should be city sales tax and county sales. That should be the county sales tax. Just ignore this. This is wrong. I can tell you by looking at it. Our use tax are expected to grow in 2020. So the 4.7% and the 2.9%, those are the city and the county, respectively, on use taxes. The negative 23.2% and negative 23.4% are the city's, the county and the city sales tax. And that is what we expect to be the result of COVID. Let me kind of stop there and tell you a little bit more about what we've done to come up with our estimates for 2020 and 2021. I've been able to, because of the access that we have as a city, is we can look at actual sales tax collections by each company, each remitter, and then also by month, and are able to look at that trend line much closely. And I've spent a lot of time going in and looking at where those changes are. As expected, grocery stores and big box stores, we expect won't drop as much. We just got preliminary data yesterday, and those assumptions are holding somewhat true. They're much more on target compared to where they normally are. We were only seeing half of March, the March impact, so April will be worse, but we are seeing a drop in the restaurants, some restaurants closing, some doing carry out. And so we took those numbers and carried those through the rest of the year with a slowly regaining, not quite back to full boat by the end of the year. And those numbers came up to about a 23% reduction from 2019 over the previous year. Conversely, in 2021, then, because we show that growing and coming back close to where we were, and I'll give that a caveat, but that makes us have a large percentage growth in 21 over 20. Really what those numbers, and I expect them to be when we're done, is about a 3%, 3 to 4% below actual 2019 numbers is where we will end up for 2021. So it's really a regain of what we lost this year, but not quite all the way back where we expect to be on sales and use taxes. And I apologize, we'll get you a revised table out. Those numbers are just in the wrong order. Liquor tax is the next item. We had a very strong growth in liquor tax in 2019 over 2018. That comes from liquor by the drink. So some of that is likely from growth in businesses and places that sell liquor by the drink, and then just a general growth in the economic sector. That was a high growth area. In 2020, we expect that to drop significantly. We're showing about a 70% reduction. Again, we have about 2 or 3 months of revenue that's in, but over time that's going to drop and significantly. So we don't expect to make that all up. And then we expect to make back about, or I guess let's put it this way. I'll step back on that. We normally bring in about $1 million total over the 3 funds. So for liquor tax, I expect us to bring in only about $350,000 in 2020, and then close to $700,000 in 2021. So we're going to go down a third from where, or 2/3 from where we are now, and gain back about a third of that in the out years. Again, the percentages don't quite show that, but tells you what we're looking at. Generally, electric and franchise fees were down last year. That was the primary driver of electric and gas franchise fees is the cost of the service. Those of you that read your electric and gas bill see that there's normally a cost of fuel or a fuel adjustment charge on your budget, or on your bill. Those are the drivers in usage changes. So not only the weather can change that, but those fuel adjustments have been running historically low compared to what you would have expected over the last 3 or 4 years. That's because the energy market is so much cheaper, and even the price of oil drives gas and electric prices somewhat. So estimating for this year, trying to look at a historical number, we think there will be a little bit of a drop still, just because of normal prices. And then we just aren't certain what the electric and gas changes will be or what the changes will be by the consumer that would affect those rates. And then for 2021 and beyond, we expect to kind of go back to normal. That should be an item that recovers pretty quickly. Telecom is always just based on growth. And so whether or not one company versus another is growing or shrinking, obviously landline telephones continue to drop dramatically. Google and some other fibers have not had some up and downs as in their growth. And that market last year was about 12% overall, but I think this year we're looking at more of a 4% number. And I can't remember why 21 goes down just a little bit, but I think that was based on some trend estimates and where the money was coming from. Motor fuel tax, this is another one that we know last year was about a 1.2% growth. That is a percentage-based number, that is a locked amount that we share at the state level. It's not percentage-based. So it's based on gallonage more than it is on price. So we expect there to be a drop in motor fuel taxes for 2020, but we just don't know. I use some of the numbers that the state used in their consensus revenue estimate to get to ours. And then building permits, we had a large jump last year 36.6%. Again, this can be up and down quite a bit. Knowing what some of our permits are this year, I think we'll be about 7% above that, but then go back down to expect a little bit of a slowdown in building permits, but also back to what has been a normal average over time in 2021. So that's a real high level, quick review of our major revenue sources, but I wanted you to see those. I will also tell you that everything to the right in 2022 and on is based on historical. I think we will probably mess with 2022 on the property tax projections because we would expect any hit to happen there if there were foreclosures or anything like that as a result of businesses going out of business. But again, it's so far out that it's just difficult to tell. So we may be a little more conservative on that, but the rest will be built into historical averages. Overall, the general fund revenues for the revised budget, we expect to be about $47.8 million out of the general fund compared to 55.6. That's a drop of, I believe, $7.8 million. The largest drops, sales tax is 4.9 of that. Franchise fees, about 500,000, 600,000. The other two large hits and charges and fees are about $600,000. We think in court fines going down because of lack of activity, but also delay. Lack of activity and delay in collection. And then we show a large decrease, almost $1 million in Parks and Recs fees over the rest of the year. And that will be adjusted on the expenditure side. So I think it'll be somewhat revenue neutral, but that is why you see that large number and that large drop. And then those percentages down below, that I hope that helps explain why there's a negative 30% in charges and fees and 55% some of those other revenues. And I think we're close to the end here. Next one, Caitlin. Just the quick overview of it, as you can see, 2020 revised for the first time in a long time. Sales taxes are going to most likely be below property taxes. But next year, we expect that to be in 2021, be a little bit more normal and go back to it being slightly higher than property taxes. Next slide. And here's just a quick breakdown of that, of the major sources. Not all of the sales and use taxes obviously are in the general fund. Some go to dedicated funds such as parks and pipes and public safety equipment and the highway fund or special highway fund. So those revenues are also counted in these amounts and the revised numbers that you see between 19 and 2020. And then liquor tax, you can see that drop again. We're about 300 and or about $1 million total. We'll drop to 300 and then be about $600,000 in 2021. Guest tax is another one that, as you would expect, that will have a lot less occupancy than we have. That the numbers for 2020 are actually higher than I would have expected, but we've had 2 early months with some decent numbers. So we think that even at 20% of what they normally bring in for the rest of the year, we'll end up around $300,000. And it'll be hard. This is one that's going to be difficult because we've added a hotel, so the baseline's changed quite a bit. Gas tax and franchise fees I already talked about. So totally, just out of those major revenue sources, we're looking at about a $7.4 million reduction across all those funds, and that doesn't include some of those other fees, the court fees and the Parks and Rec fees that I talked about. And then, do you want to talk about this, Nolan? I'll be happy to answer any questions on any of that, and then we'll talk a little bit about where we're going forward in the budget process.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, I see some hands up, so let's start with Tammy. Tammy, I still have you as muted.
Better?
Yep, there you go.
Well, I guess it's by opinion if it's better or not, but anyway. Has any of these numbers taken into account and our government is talking about, it's not that I'm saying I believe it, but at least considering possibility of a spike back in the fall? I mean, I know we've taken into account what we've looked at and what we've experienced,
Yeah.
you know, the threshold of hell thus far, but you know, are we considering, you know, or is that just a talking point, or is it something that we've considered in this budget?
That's a good question. I debated that, and I think what I'm going to see if the way I've done it is that I think I was probably a little too conservative in what we'll see in revenues for March, April, and May losses. I think I'm probably over aggressively there, but then I showed, like I said, I'm slowly working up. So, you know, we're down 50%, then we're down 60, or then we're down 40, then we're down 30, working up till the end of the year. I think that there is some wiggle room in there if there is a second spike, but as I debated that and looked at what those options were, I think that even if there is a spike, there doesn't seem to be as much of a public appetite for a major shutdown like we did before. So, and businesses will have time to adapt. So I'm hoping that if it does happen, I think we will then regroup. Obviously, we're going to be watching this very closely, but I don't expect that we're going to be super far off of the numbers just because what we received yesterday, kind of our preview of the May numbers for our local amounts, they came in better than I thought. I'm not going to say that they're not great, but they're better than my scenario. And I'm hoping that I'm on the pessimistic side for the first couple of months. Those don't come to fruition, but on the back end, maybe if things are worse or we have another dip, then maybe it won't be as bad. So if anyone's got a better crystal ball, I'm more than happy to use it. Yeah. That's for sure.
Yeah. All right. I appreciate your work that you've done. And I think just from our perspective, if you have teenage drivers, you know, lack of activity in the court fines, encourage everybody to go to the speed limit and stop signs, because those could go up.
Yeah. Yeah. Court fines are one that, you know, it's related to activity, but it's a process now because we've delayed dockets and right. How fast those will work through the process. And it's the same with motor vehicle registrations at the county. We don't know how that's going to look and how we're ever going to get caught up because they kept busy before. So taking 2 extra dockets and shoving them in, I'm not sure how that's going to play out, but I mean, they'll do their best. I know they will. They do a great job, but it's really hard to figure out how that's going to play out.
Appreciate you taking my questions.
Nope. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Tammy. I see Kurt's hand up. Go ahead.
Yes. Thank you for your good work on this. I just had a couple of clarifying questions, and I don't want to take more than my fair share amount of time, so hopefully you can answer them quickly. But I had 3 questions. Number one, we go back one slide, Caitlin. So if we look at the $84 million budget, 53% of it comes from city sales tax. You're estimating a 23.2% reduction in that. According to my math, that would put us at like a 10.3 loss on city sales tax. And according to this, it shows more like a lot less than that, right? Like,
I know, I feel confident in the numbers, not the percentages, doing math on top of my head here, but on the general fund, absolutely I think it's 4.9 million. I should have that number memorized by now. The general fund piece, out of the rest of the funds, that's another 1.5 million that we would lose in sales and use taxes overall. So that 23% probably is only calculating the sales piece. I'm showing actual use taxes going up, believe it or not.
Okay.
Because we're running almost 15 to 20% ahead on use taxes right now. I don't think we'll end up that high. I think it was, but I do have some of that still growing and not taking the hit. So that's probably where the percentages are on.
All right, that's good clarification because obviously that's the biggest part
And
of
both
our
are
revenue.
Yeah.
Okay, so you also mentioned that we benefited from our investment revenue to the tune of $500,000 last year. Do we expect to, see a significant decline and lose money because of the market this year in our investment revenues?
So that's a good question. Here's the good and the bad of that. Last year, when we did the revised budget, we did not increase very much the investment revenue. So when we did the 2020 budget, we actually expected revenue to be pretty low. So it was a place I was expecting to go in and increase if rates stayed the same. So while we will take in much less money than last year from a budget standpoint, we really didn't budget much of an increase. And I don't think in the overall budget adjustments, we will see anything that really messes with the budget at all.
So I'm losing my 401k in my 401k. We're not going to lose money there.
No. We are investments, and you might remember we didn't talk about it a lot when we did it, but we did go to an investment agreement with Columbia Capital Management. We're able to do different investment tools and bid out, and every month we've done that. We were able to lock in a CD, a couple of CDs, $4 million each earlier this year at like 1.25, which I was mad because we should have had it at 1.4. Missed it by a day. And then a couple of days later, I was very happy with 1.25. So, we're down around half percent right now on earnings. But over the first few months, I think we're at 1.5 or something. So we've done pretty well compared to everyone else. But no, we're not in anything that we can lose. We just might get next to nothing on earnings. So.
Good work. I expect us to be in conservative, right? And I wasn't here when you guys made those decisions. And then my last question. There's two ways to help an anchor budget. One is to increase the amount coming in. The other one is to increase the savings. I was wondering if there's any estimates that you put forth. I know the city's saving money along the way here with less events and just a lot of things. Have those been built into this as well?
Well, so the expenditure side, we have not, because we're still, that's what we're working on. There are definitely things that we will save on, and we're building that into those budgets. I will tell you that based on that base budget that we put together and what we expected, that target budget really being what we wanted to be at for 2021, some of those moves won't be nearly as tough as if we hadn't done this exercise earlier. So I think we've identified some other areas where we can pare down, but that's really what the next meeting is about. And it's taken longer. I'm not making life easy on everybody for my first time because it has just taken so long to do revenue estimating. And like I said, we've had a new auditor and some other things that have stretched this out. But I think we're really close to being able to come in with a plan that gets us close to at least a balanced budget or not spending down very far into our reserve percentage. And that's our goal in putting the budget together.
Thank you, sir. Good job.
Yep.
All right, Lisa, go ahead.
Thank you. Two things. First, I request that the revised tables that you produce, please post them with the agenda materials that were made available to the public. And if we could somehow indicate that they were revised so that nobody's confused, right? The second question I have relates to the liquor tax. And I have admittedly never paid too much attention to the liquor tax, but if I'm understanding what you're saying correctly, the liquor tax really only applies when somebody purchases liquor at like a restaurant or a bar. Is that correct? And so all of the packaged liquor sales that are happening right now are not doing anything.
That is correct. And it's been so long since I've done this at the state level, how that liquor tax goes, how that's done at the state level. But yeah, we don't it's taxed differently for the package sales. I guess that's what they call it. And yes, our revenue sources are only for those sales in the restaurants. However, You might know that state law also does that through wholesale retailers. Liquor retailers also be wholesalers. And so some of the restaurants around might buy from those liquor stores. So I'm sure there's a trickle down effect, at least economically, but from a standpoint of taxation, yes, it only comes out of those places selling liquor by the drink.
Thank you. I really just wanted to clarify because the wisdom right now is that liquor sales overall are up during this stressful time. And I just wanted to make sure I understood why it didn't seem to be impacting our budget positively.
Yes, in fact, weirdly enough, when I was going through the sales tax revenues that came out yesterday, I saw several liquor stores listed in sales tax. And I thought, boy, that's weird. Well, with the change in the state law, they do sell things that are taxable now. And it just, it's not something that normally pops up. I just happened to see them, and it took me aback because not normally used to seeing what they give you. So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Lisa. Go ahead, Eric.
Okay, go ahead and leave this slide up. We're kind of talking to it. Showing a shortfall this year about almost $7.4 million, and I'm wondering how much of that's going to be absorbed with the actual that we wind up spending in the 220 actual. I know every year, as you illustrated on some of the earlier slides, we always overestimate, so there's a significant amount of savings. So that will take care of some of that 7.365 million, but probably not all of it, of course. I'm wondering, is there any way we can take a look at our savings due to the coronavirus situation? I mean, I don't think we're attending conferences out of town. I don't think we're got all the vehicles out on the road. We're probably not expending as much office supplies and material, probably reducing our costs in a number of areas. Just going to be curious if we can, if we had some idea of what we expect to recoup from that, and what we feel is just a best guess estimate of how we can bring that number 7.365 down with actual cost savings and taking into account our over budgeting.
Well, let me try to answer that in two parts. One is we absolutely, that's exactly the kind of things we're working on the budget side, on the expenditure side, and that we hope to have for you pretty quick. That'll show where those savings are from things in travel and conferences are a big part of that. There's still some continuing ed and things that have to go on and can go on remotely, but I agree that we expect to see savings in those areas, as well as probably even electricity and some other things. The second piece of that is the 7.4 that's showing here is not just general fund. So it just happens to be close to the 7.8 number, 7.7 number. That is actually the shortfall in the general fund. And for both the general fund amount and the amounts in the other funds, yes, the underspending should help with this somewhat, but we were, like I said, for last year, we were about $5 million underspent, but we broke even because revenues were down. So it's a little hard to say exactly how much of that is in there. I think it will. It'll put us back to even, obviously, with the work we did pre-budget. I still think there's some that'll go in that savings, but our goal was to try to stay, above 40%, if at all possible, in the ending balance for both. And we'll see where we end up when we start putting all these pieces together. But if we did that, we would still be probably digging into the balance to cut, $2 to $3 million. And that's just, don't hold me to that, but that's off the top of my head. So, we're trying to cut $3 or $4 or $5 million out of the budget, no doubt.
I'm raising this issue because I'd like to at least have kind of a fuzzy idea of where it is. And because we haven't done anything that I'm aware of to reduce our spending, consciously reduce our spending during this situation where we're losing revenue. And I do get queries from taxpayers about that, like, why aren't we doing anything? We've got other cities that had furloughs, done all kinds of different stuff. in order to keep their budget under control. We really haven't done anything. We're kind of just sitting back saying, well, we got a good reserve and that sort of thing. I don't know if I'm putting a good front to our folks or not. I'm just kind of like some defensible numbers there.
We'll absolutely will have that when we do the budget. I will say we have done some things internally, but most of our big expenses, you guys might remember, we bought a lot of vehicles and things early in the year and in the middle of projects. Those things are still going on. So some of it's taking care of itself. When people aren't traveling, we're saving money, things along that nature. But as far as engaging in future big projects and other things, those things aren't really happening and coming forward now. So it's not that we're not doing anything, but it's not really been at a point where we're able to tell you what the total of that activity is, because it's a little bit here and a little bit there. It's not just big ticket items. So, but we definitely have been working on a plan, and I think being able to get to a balanced budget with these reduced numbers, or at least not decimating our reserves, is a goal that we're all searching for.
Okay, well, I don't want to get caught in a position where after this thing kind of clears up a little bit, somebody comes up and says, hey, we need a tax increase, either sales tax, property tax, or something like that, because that's going to be indefensible if we didn't do anything during the period of the crises and try to pass that just directly on to the taxpayers. That would not be a good situation and certainly be a no-go. So that's kind of where I'm coming from on that.
I absolutely agree with you, and I can tell you that my whole goal in this has been knowing that increases in tax revenues is not an option. So increases in rates was not an option in putting this budget together, and so that we're not working with that in mind at all. No.
Okay.
All right, thanks, Eric. If you're done, we'll go with Jill.
Thank you. Thanks, Don. This was a lot of really great information. My one question is kind of looking at this chart that we're looking at now, as well as kind of the last 4 pages, really. And there's a lot of lines on there that indicate a confidence that 2021 will sort of go back generally to our revenues from 2019, 2018, and sort of get back on track. And this 2020 is the outlier. I was just curious where that confidence or where that data comes from that our, especially sales taxes, will be back in 21 to close to the levels that they were before COVID, just keeping in mind people who've had job losses, things like that, people being stretched more thin.
Yeah, I wish I could tell you how how confident I am in that, but I'm not. I would say that those estimates come from looking at what several other people are doing, looking at the state's estimates on how they may look at things to come back. I guess I would say I'm cautiously optimistic that at least some of the basic things that we have in this community will continue and move forward. But we know that there will be some changes in businesses that are offered. Probably some retail shops and things will close because of this, and that's just impossible to tell at this time. So one of the reasons, and one of my major reasons for trying to be above that 40% reserve mark at the end of this 2021 budget, is that we would have adequate reserves to handle if there is still some downturn coming from that. It would be different if we were coming at 30% or 25, something below the GFOA recommendation. We're going to try to hit it at a higher amount so that if we have to dig into reserves next year because things didn't grow back as fast as we liked, that's one thing. If there is a change in property taxes, that's a little bit different and something that we'll have to look at next year. I just don't feel like it's that balance of being super pessimistic and super optimistic, and it's so hard to find that middle ground. So I think that's my idea, is that we would have at least some money available, and a 40% balance at the end of 2021 would be well above, I think, where some other communities are setting right now. in their plans. So I feel like it would put us in a good spot and give us that ability. And if we're right, then great, we're in a great position. If we're wrong, we'll dig into it a little bit. But we've at least done some cutting early on to be in that position. But you know, if you made me put some money down on it, I'm not going to give you very good odds that I'm right. In fact, I know I'm wrong. It's just about how far off I'm wrong. So.
All right, thank you. Let's go with Tammy now.
Yeah, just a comment. I know that, and I appreciate your question, Jill. Hallmark, you know, and some other retailers that I'm familiar with, they're looking at least 2 to 3 years to hopefully come back up to where they were prior to this. And so to see some of these numbers, I am a little bit pessimistic about it. But you know, of course, we got liquor by the drink. So if restaurants are open, probably, you know, maybe that'll pop up. But I think we do need to be, we are, looks like conservative, but perhaps a little more conservative. I would rather be wrong than right when we look at this bounce back. Retailers, and we've got a lot of retail that's empty. We've got a lot of retail that's been closed for a while. We've got retail that's trying to start up and start projects. It's a very hard market, and I think we need to really stay close on these types of projections, because that looks really, really optimistic.
And thank you. I would agree that I'm not 100% sold on those numbers in the out year, but I think that's again, I think we at least have the reserves, and there's nothing to say that between now and when we finalize this in July that we don't still have to change these. These are not set in stone by any means. Unfortunately, in most years, I would like these to be set in stone, but this year's just not a year we can do that. The more experience and the more data we have before we nail down the budget, the better off we are. So I would not be surprised at all if I come back and say, you're right, we need to take that number down 3 million or whatever the number is. Yeah. So, but we've got that in the books and is our plan, and hope you guys will be patient with us, because this has not been an easy thing to peg down. And you're right, it's hard to be, it depends what day it is sometimes, how pessimistic or optimistic I am. So when you watch the news and read the economics journals, it's just, you know, it's all over the board. So.
Yeah, then with the election here on top of that, that's another decoration on the cake.
Yeah. And the energy market too. We don't know how long this will happen. So that's absolutely what makes this even more difficult than what I've been through before, is those a lot of changes. You know, we expected there to be at least a slowdown, but not, you know, a dip, not a ravine or a cavern. So it's been you know, I'm glad we were ready for it, but you're right. We just don't know what the other side's going to look like.
Yeah. Don't lose sleep.
Oh, well, I dream about numbers this time of year. There's nothing I can do about it.
All right, thank you. I don't see any more hands raised. Nolan, are you going to take over and add something here?
Just wanted to make sure you guys are aware of kind of the upcoming budget calendar. I usually make a mention if you're traveling or going to be out of town. If you know of any travel plans, let us know. I realize that might be kind of a different conversation this year, and a lot of things have been moved and canceled and changed. But again, if you know you're going to be absent from one of the meetings, let us know. We can kind of schedule a separate time to meet with you to make sure you get the information or up to speed. And obviously, if there's a number of you that may be gone or absent from a meeting, we can work to reschedule or adjust our calendar as needed. So just wanted to get this in front of you. Next budget discussion will be at the June 2nd Council Committee meeting. And then following that, we'll have Ann Smith-Tate and to come in on the 16th to talk about the SCDC visit Shawnee and have those conversations. So just kind of wanted to give you guys kind of an update on what the calendar looks like in that process, and just making sure that you guys were aware is, I guess at this point, you may or may not have travel plans with the COVID situation, but just wanted to get the information to you, make sure you were aware. So thank you all. And again, feel free to reach out if you have any questions, and we can schedule a separate discussion with you as well. And appreciate your time this evening. So.
Thank you, Nolan. Appreciate that. This item we discussed is for informational purposes only. So is there any further discussion from the council? And I do not see any hands raised. Is there anyone from the public that's there that would like to speak on this item?
There is not.
All right, thank you so much. So that concludes this item. Item number 2 is a budget overview on the street improvement program, the SIP, and the proposed 2021 to 2030 capital improvement program, the CIP. City Engineer Snyder will provide an update on the street improvement program, and Assistant Public Work Director Pearl will review the proposed 2021 to 2030 capital improvement program. Let's see, Lauren, are you going first or is it Matt?
It's Matt Pearl, Assistant Public Works Director. I'm going first. So.
Yeah, Matt, go ahead.
All right. Good evening, council members. We'll start off with the 2021-2030 proposed capital improvement plan. Just a reminder that some of the things we're going to talk about are just highlights. The complete summary is in the packet that was provided for this, the agenda for this meeting. I will start with a general overview on what the CIP is, Capital Improvement Program. Lauren will take it from there for a few slides to go over the Street Improvement Program, and then I will take back over and go over some of the current projects we have on the CIP, some of the future projects, and then kind of what happens in the years 2026 to 2029, should be 2030 there. But yeah, so the next slide is, what is the CIP? The CIP stands for Capital Improvement Program. It's basically a 10-year list of projects, infrastructure projects that we do for long-term improvements to the city. We use this for a guide to budgeting and prioritizing these projects, to get funding from outside sources, to stage them on different years to get those funding opportunities. Last year, we actually moved from a six-year CIP to a 10-year CIP. So just also with the budget update they did earlier this evening, we do use a lot of acronyms when we're going or talking CIP, all the different funding sources that are on the CIP. So this lists the acronym with the abbreviation, and then also kind of where the funding comes from for that source. The first of which being the SIP Street Improvement Program. I think Don or Caitlin mentioned this is part of the pavement sales tax that was passed in 2015. Lauren or Snyder, our city engineer, will get into kind of how that breakout was for that pavement sales tax in the next few slides. CDBG, this is a CDBG project fund that is community development block grants. It's federal funds that we use with city matching funds to do certain projects in some of the neighborhoods here in Shawnee. The SMAC funds are SMAC stands for Stormwater Management Advisory Council. That's through Johnson County. We use some different city matching source funds to get those funds for projects to deal with storm drainage issues. CARS funding is County Assistance Road System. These funds are for some of the major roadways we have in the city. I believe they have to have over a certain traffic count and whatnot to be eligible for these CARS funds. The stormwater utility is actually a property tax that is calculated on your property. Residential is 1 ERU. I think we're currently sitting at $72 for 1 ERU. So that's $72 per year you pay on your property taxes for residential properties. Commercial properties pay additional ERUs based on how much impervious surface they have on their site. So some commercial properties pay a lot more of these ERUs. Special Highway Fund, Dawn mentioned this one. This comes from the state gas tax, the city sales tax, as well as the impact fee from the landfill. Parks and Pipes is a city sales tax. The Parks and Pipes portion of the sales tax is a 1/8 cent sales tax, half of which is dedicated to parks projects and half of which is dedicated to storm drainage projects. So that's how that one breaks out. With that, just a reminder there that those taxes with the asterisks do sunset in 2025. So we'll need to look at those in the future. I'm going to pass it over to Lauren now to do a quick update on the SIP program.
Good evening, members of council. This is Lauren Snyder, city engineer. So the street improvement program is the SIP, and I'm going to take you down some of the history down and talk about how we got to where we are with the SIP. So in 2014, the city recognized that we needed funding for the 800 miles of pavement throughout the city. So on November 4th, 2014, voters approved ordinance number 3094, providing for a 3/8% or 0.375% pavement special retailer sales tax. This tax was meant to provide $38.4 million in funding over 10 years between April 1st, 2015 and March 31st, 2025. There are two pavement programs the $38.4 million funds: Mill and Overlay and the Street Improvement Program. The Street Improvement Program, the SIP, includes chip seal and residential street improvements. 2/3 of the $38.4 million pavement fund, or $25.6 million, is used for the city's Mill and Overlay program. 1/3 of the $38.4 million pavement fund, or $12.8 million, is used for the Street Improvement Program, or SIP fund. Of that $12.8 million SIP fund, $3.1 million is used for chip seal, with the remaining $9.7 million for residential street improvement. So the SIP funding allocation for chip seal improvements were fairly straightforward. The city knew that it had 23.1 miles of roadway that needed chip seal and calculated it would cost $3.1 million to complete the chip seal work over the 10 years. How the $9.7 million of the SIP fund would be used for residential street improvements is more complicated. So it is detailed by Policy Statement 68, which is titled Street Improvement Program. In March of 2015, I think your packet probably says 2014, but it was March of 2015, the city publicly solicited applications for residents who wanted to serve on an SIP task force. This task force consisted of 12 residents, with 3 residents selected from each ward, and they were appointed by the mayor. The residents were supported by city staff to determine how the city should select streets to receive SIP funding. The task force met 3 times over a period of 3 months and came up with 7 selection criteria, which were street width, traffic volume, number of homes per mile, distance from schools, distance from parks, connections to curb streets, and connections to sidewalk streets. Based on those criteria, a street could score a maximum of 80 points. 4 secondary criteria, I think the slide says 3, but there were 4 secondary criteria that were established as important but not easily quantified criteria. Those criteria were leveraging of funds. Are other funding sources available for the project? Second was resident support. Do residents along the street support the project? Will they voluntarily participate in it? Will gaining their support be cost prohibitive? The next was construction cost. Can the resurfacing be completed with the available dollars? And the last was street rating. The street surface rating developed by PACER, the Pavement Surface Evaluation and Rating System. So about 58 miles of roadway were evaluated and ranked against those 7 criteria. That ranking resulted in a top 11 list of projects. Flint Street ranked the highest with a score of 69 and was completed in 2018. The next project that will be completed is West 60th Street this year in 2020. You will note that while West 60th Street scored 1 point lower than Goddard or Monrovia, it is being completed second. This is because of the secondary criteria of leveraging funds. The CDBG Community Development Block Grant funds were available in 2020 for West 60th Street. You will also note that West 60th Street has a much smaller cost per segment. Waiting to construct Goddard after 60th Street also provides some time for the pavement tax fund to accumulate to cover the $2.9 million cost of constructing Goddard. Another thing you may notice is that Goddard Street has the same score as Monrovia, but has been prioritized above Monrovia. This is because Goddard was already a part of the CIP in 2014. And that is what the asterisks mean on those slides beside Flint Street and Goddard Street. Those were both on the CIP in 2014. So as projects are completed and community development occurs, the scoring can change over time. Therefore, per Policy Statement 68, staff reevaluates the projects against the criteria periodically to keep the ratings up to date. This reevaluation will occur again in 2022. Are there any questions about the SIP or the ranking of streets before I turn the presentation back over to Matt?
I don't see any hands raised, so go ahead and proceed.
Thank you, Lauren. Moving on, as noted in the packet, our total CIP for the next 10 years, not including the projects in 2020, is at $151.6 million over 10 years. Each of these projects are prioritized based on the priority-based budgeting values of the city listed over there on the right. So that's a key thing to remember when looking at these projects. This slide here goes over the breakout of how we pay for these different projects. Just to highlight, the top right quadrant of the graph shows our outside funding sources. Almost 20% of our CIP is funded by outside funding sources. Some of these outside funding sources I listed earlier are SMAC funds, CARS funds. We also do a cost share with KDOT on certain projects. We get some STP, Surface Transportation Program funds through MARC, which is the Mid-America Regional Council. So a lot of those are good sources for outside fundings on projects. So moving on, the map on the screen here kind of gives a dot or a line for all the proposed projects on the list that have an actual location. Some of the maintenance projects aren't known at the time or aren't known currently until we get to those years where they'll be the locations for the pipe repairs and the streets that are selected for the milling overlay will be added to those projects at that time. So we'll just go through some of the projects on this map, starting down in the right-hand corner of the city, bottom right-hand corner. We'll go look at 75th Street. This is a 2020 project, but we are using 2019 CARS funds on this project. This will be a mill and overlay type project with some improvements at the Quivira and 75th Street intersection traffic signal, going from Quivira all the way to Schweitzer. The current status of the project is an initial design. If you look over there on the right, you'll see the tentative schedule for the project. So looking to final design in September of this year with bidding in late this year. So the next project we'll look at is Plum Road from Midland to the South City limits. This is also a CARS project. We have the cover sheet from the preliminary plans there shown. They are in preliminary planning stages, field check plans basically, so they're moving on to final design. This will be a mill and overlay curb and sidewalk replacement with some storm drainage improvements, a lot of storm drainage improvements along this route, and then some lighting upgrades. As mentioned earlier by Lauren Snyder, we also have 60th Street on here. This is a SIP project, reconstruction and widening of the street, sidewalk and trail improvements along this route, storm drainage improvements, lighting along the entire route. And just a note there that this is a SIP street and the SIP rankings will be reviewed after Goddard Street to determine the next two SIP projects. You can see there the preliminary concept is well along the way. They're moving to final design. So. The next project in the western portion of the city is the Wilder Bluff Park. You guys probably saw the governing body has seen some concepts on this, as well as the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board. The concept has been chosen and they are in the preliminary design stages. Monticello Phase 1 is the next project we'll look at. This is a complete reconstruction and widening from Shawnee Ridge Parkway to 71st Street along Monticello. It will require relocation of the Southern Star Pipeline. That work has already, design on that work has already initiated. Sidewalk and trail improvements along this route, storm drain improvements. This project is slated to start in 2021, so they are in design phase. '67th and Cottonwood is a storm drainage project we have on 2021. This is to alleviate flooding of 6 homes and 2 streets. This is a Johnson County SMAC funding eligible project. The culvert work under 67th Street and the culvert work under Cottonwood Street, 67th being right here, Cottonwood being here, as well as channel improvements along these rear yards. The next street, or the next project is Goddard Street, from 55th Street to Johnson Drive. This is a SIP project as well. This is a complete reconstruction and widening with sidewalk and trail improvements, storm drainage improvements, and lighting improvements. Again, a note there that the SIP rankings are going to be reviewed after completion of this project to determine what funding is available left on the SIP program to determine the remaining projects that can be funded with that. Monticello Phase 2 is the next project. This is a complete new roadway that doesn't exist today, south of 71st Street. So it's a realignment of Monticello Road. Sidewalk and trail facilities will be included, storm drainage facilities, as well as street lighting. Midland, Lackman to Elm Ridge is the next project. This is a typical mill and overlay type project with removal and replacement of damaged curb and sidewalks, upgrade and repair of the storm drainage facilities, and then lighting improvements along the route. The next project of the note is the Johnson Drive signalization. This project is to add signals to both the northbound and southbound ramps on along Johnson Drive to get onto 435. This has the ability to be interconnected with the signal at Johnson Drive and Renner. And this is also a CARS eligible project. The last project I'll go over briefly, not to leave any projects out, but just in the essence of time. We will go over the Midland from Chalmers Parkway to I-435. This is a major project with a complete rebuild of the roadway, curb and gutter installation, sidewalk and trail facilities, storm drainage facilities, and lighting improvements. I believe on the CIP, this one is estimated at $12 million, $12.5 million. So we are trying to seek additional outside funding via a PSP grant, planning sustainable places, and maybe even some MARC STP funds. But those applications for those funds are being done now, so we won't know if we have those quite yet. So. Moving ahead to the later years, 2026 through 2030, with the sunset of the parks and pipes and pavement sales taxes, these years' projects are really just maintenance projects and they're reduced maintenance projects because this is a fully funded CIP program, so we can't really show any funding from those taxes if they were to renew until they actually renew. So if they are to renew. So the projects listed here are basically just the annual street maintenance program and the annual pipe repair program that we complete every year. So the next steps for this presentation and the CIP, this will go to the Planning Commission meeting on June 1st, and then we will take it to the City Council meeting for approval on June 8th. I believe those were noted in the council memo as well, those dates. So with that, I will open it up for any questions or discussion.
All right, thank you so much. I see Jill's hand up. Go ahead.
Thank you. I have several questions, but I feel like they're fairly straightforward. The first one is, I assume that we are only eligible for some of those partnership funds based on what we are able and willing to match as a city. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And then on the chart, the pie chart with the funding source breakout, is the pavement tax not listed on there because that goes exclusively to the SIP? And this is the CIP? Can you help me understand that?
Sure, let me go back to that slide real fast. The pavement tax is actually part of the special highway fund, which is listed in the lower right-hand corner here. So
got it. Okay.
1/8 of it goes to the SIP program, 2/8 of it goes to mill and overlay, but it all is part of the special highway fund.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay. I think I have two more. I noticed on the Flum Road one, and it only caught my eye because I live so close to there, but the map of that one shows it's stopping at, it looks like 71st, but then the information says it goes to the south city limits. I just wanted to clarify that. Yeah, that one there.
That might just be an error on the plans. Lauren Snyder can maybe speak to that a little bit more. 1 second.
We'll check into that one. It looks like it's probably an error on the preliminary plan set.
Okay, thank you. And then my last question is just if you could clarify the 2026 to 2030 proposed. I understand that there's, you know, the unknown of whether that tax is renewed or not. So clarify again, these projects that are listed here are basic road maintenance projects that would theoretically happen even if that tax is not renewed when it sunsets in 2025.
So these projects are maintenance projects. So redoing the asphalt surface on the roadways, on streets throughout the city, or fixing failing pipes throughout the city. These are maintenance type projects that we do every year. And the locations of those projects aren't actually determined until those years, but we are set at a certain fund limit or expenditure limit for those projects based on the funding projections produced by finance.
Got it. Thank you.
All right, Lindsay.
All right, thank you for all that great information. I have had some residents along Monticello Road ask when the neighborhood meeting would take place about that. I know, considering it involves the moving of a pipeline, it's obviously pretty, you know, involved. So when might they be getting those types of information?
I'll let Lauren Snyder, city engineer, handle that question.
This is Lauren Snyder. Our designer, HNTB, just finished a virtual storyboard. We are in the process of getting ready to send out notifications to residents along the corridor of when that meeting will be. We're just in the final stages of confirming the date at this time.
Great. And then was it 2023 for phase 2? I know it was on there, but I missed it. On Monticello.
2022.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
All right, and then Lisa, I see your hand up.
Yes, thank you. Representing Ward 3, I think it's very important that I ask about 2 areas that I know our residents are concerned about and would like to see improvements on. The first area is Gleason Road, the 1-lane bridge. I will point out that I feel, and our residents in the southwest part of the city feel, that this road is dangerous and that the traffic volume just continues to increase as we add more and more houses. My concern about this project is, first of all, that it's not on the plan. Second of all, that the preliminary designs that I saw for it are very, very old, and they don't take into account that there is a new, beautiful multi-million-dollar mansion in the way of where we were proposing to make some corrections to the road. So can anybody tell me where that is in the, just in the thought process of when we might be taking a look at that?
Lisa, this is Caitlin, and this might be answer some others' questions as well. The capital improvement plan that you're seeing here tonight is the final proposed plan for the 10-year projections for these projects, and so therefore any project that's not on this list therefore isn't on any capital improvement plan for at least the next 10 years.
I understand that. I'm questioning why that is.
That would be a governing body decision to add any additional projects, assuming that we do have capability in future funding.
And my concern is that this is not really getting any attention. So I'm not sure that the governing body can make a decision about where this ranks compared to these other very important projects without having, you know, the preliminary data. So how does that work? And it's not just that project. The other project that I was interested in is Clare Road. And as you know, that's another place that goes down to 1 lane. And that, yeah.
We weren't anticipating having any discussions for additional projects just due to the current economic situation, in hopes that we can retain the projects that are currently on the list. But anything moving forward, if any funding does become available, we would hope that we could obtain outside funding. In addition to that, I would say that those 2 roads, if I'm remembering correctly, do apply to our Green Streets category, in hopes that for any development in the future, those would be developed by any developer as a green street, therefore improved at that point. But we can absolutely in the future look to add any additional projects, not just those 2 that you listed, but any that the council would like to discuss it in future discussions for future capital improvements.
Okay, and just to be clear, the areas that I'm talking about, I would not anticipate that they would be subject to future development necessarily. They are all developed. They have houses on either side of them. So it would take somebody coming in and buying up all of those houses and saying, I want to put new houses here. And I don't think that that is where this area is going anytime soon. And it's not the issue of the houses that are immediately next to it. It is those that are a little bit further away that have to travel through this area to go really towards the rest of the city of Shawnee. So Caitlin, what I'm hearing is that if there are council members that are interested in exploring this, that we should take it to the council, perhaps bring it up during council business, and then see if there's enough council support for it to be explored.
Yeah, this is Nolan.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Caitlin.
Yeah, I was just going to say that in the past, how we've kind of handled additional projects being added to the CIP is we have had them at those discussions at a council level, whether that be at a presentation like this, or obviously since this is the first time that the group as a whole is seeing this, at that June 8th meeting as well. And we can bring any future projects with the identified funding sources back at that time. I would just err on the side of caution of bringing forward certain projects when we do have tens of 20s of projects that are on a list that also need to be completed. But I completely understand where you're coming from, because those are 2 streets that we also here as staff are in need of improvements. So that would be a governing body decision, and we're happy to look into those 2 as well.
I appreciate that. I guess I'm struggling with how the governing body knows for the capital improvement plan, not for the SIP, like how the decisions are made and how those projects were ranked. And to not even see these kind of ranked compared to the rest of them is what's concerning. We really don't understand what the needs are throughout the city, and then sort of how they are ranked. And so we can't respond to our constituents and say, you know what? There are 30 other projects that we went through a ranking project for, and this is way down low. At the very least, we need that information. Thank you.
Yeah, and Councilmember, this is Nolan. I just wanted to add too. We actually, obviously in light of the situation, we'd actually kind of planned to actually try to do kind of a city tour to look at not only the planned projects, but some of those that aren't funded. And really kind of a lot of the things that we look at are really what's going to tie into outside funding to maximize that dollar in terms of CARS funding, in terms of SMAC funding, in terms of federal funds. And so really trying to maximize that outside dollar and really kind of how we look to prioritize it so we can take advantage of some of those sources. But we can look into those specific requests and get some additional information. And especially as Caitlin mentioned, kind of in light of kind of the Green Street concepts, are there ways that we can trim that cost down and also still provide those amenities and that safety that I think residents are desiring, but also at a reduced construction cost and a reduced maintenance cost.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Lisa. Kurt, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to actually build off of Lisa's comments here. So first of all, that Gleason Road, the 1-lane bridge, it is a big deal. It's a safety concern. as I walked and canvassed, it came up over and over, and particularly because it's a school bus route, and there's a neighborhood on the other side that has to cross over it to get to the school. So I don't know how we do it. I don't feel like there's a ton of things. I don't want to get into, we're all for the whole city, but there's not a ton in Ward 3 that for the next couple of years. And I'm not even suggesting we need this on the next couple of years, but if there's a way to get this added to the CIP, I think it's a safety issue. So definitely concur with Lisa on that. The other comment I had, really, she mentioned Clare Road, but really Clare and Mize, neither one of them are on the CIP, and I understand part of it will be through development, that those cities or those streets will get widened. But I'm looking for something we can do cheaply in the meantime, because safety is a real issue on those streets, and they are getting busier and busier. I've investigated and looked into, city staff has anyway, painting the middle, and what's come back from the engineers is that they're not even wide enough to be able to paint a stripe down the middle. And so I'm wondering if we can look at an alternative where we paint both sides even, but when it's raining out there or when it's pitch black, teenagers, older people, perhaps me, it's a dangerous area. So that wouldn't be on the CIP. I think we could do it cheaply, but I'd love to find a way to increase the safety of both Clare and Mize. So I don't know how logistically we could get the Gleason project bridge added, like Lisa was asking, but I'd be very interested in doing that. And then, I don't know, I'd really like to discuss how we can increase safety on Mize and Clare Road. Thank you. And I'll just finish by saying, I don't know if Nolan, or this may be one for Doug on the Clare and Mize. Any thoughts or ideas there?
Yeah, this is Nolan, and I don't know if Doug wants to jump in, or if I'm not sure if Lauren or Kevin are on, but I think it's something maybe we can sit down and kind of dig in and see if there's some opportunities, kind of as you mentioned, some potential kind of interim improvements or interim safety improvements and things that we can take a look at and see what kind of options we can come up with, at least on an interim basis.
I would appreciate that. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Kurt. Tammy, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Hey, I just wanted to know, can we talk about the proposed CIB project sheets? Is that okay? Anyone? Hello?
Yeah, sorry, we were just discussing here. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. On number 5, it is a information technology CIP sheet, and it talks about $294,000 and the funding sources and all this kind of thing. But it continues throughout the document. And I want to give you guys a minute to scroll over to it. And it continues to talk about the proposed community center. And I'm just concerned. The proposed community center is a dead issue, but yet it's falling into this document of information technology and their expansion. So I found that kind of concerning, that language was in there.
We apologize. You're absolutely correct. That was an error on our part. Discussing it now, that will be removed before the June 8th discussion of this at the council meeting. That money has been removed for fiber addition over in the western portion of Shawnee.
Okay. And then also I've got several, but some of them I'll hold off on. But if you guys could scroll up on those sheets to number 46, where it's talking about a storage building for Parks and Rec. And I'm still scrolling there myself. I'm on number 30. Let me get up to number 46 is the one I'm looking at, and it's for $5.5 million. And it may take you guys a minute to get there too. Oh, I passed it. Let me go back. And it's number 46. And it's from Parks and Rec, and it's talking about the future expansion and building a $5.5 million building. And I'm just in the need of 2.2 acres or 5 acres, something to that effect, storing things in houses and barns. Where are they talking about? Where are they talking about building this?
We have not identified a location for that project.
Not at all.
We have some specific locations that we would like, but we have not purchased property or moved anything on that project.
Okay, my concern is I want to make sure that it's not the property on Woodland, because that property was purchased.
It is not.
It is not, with absolute certainty.
Correct, unless the governing body chooses to. We had looked at some other property, and that was the intended property that we ended up in litigation over. That was next to the Public Works Service Center.
Okay, so it's not the property at Woodland that was intended to be the community center.
Correct.
Okay. And just in this time, and I'll say again, number 19, and I'm sorry to be jumping around, but if we go back to number 19 and the expense of, nearly 500,000 or $580,000 or $480,000, I'm a little bit concerned to have that in there for this fiscal year or 2020. Residents have voiced concern over additions to Old Shawneetown at this time. And I know that we're out to bid for Dr. Sullivan's house and all that kind of thing. But once again, as I've held caution on several other things, I don't know that this is the time to have those conversations. Are we actually
so
forward on something like that?
This is Nolan.
Yeah.
So it's just at this point, we're just in the design phase of this, of the Dr. Sullivan's house project. I don't believe that we've actually formally gone to bid with anything. And obviously with that funding source, it's something that we'll definitely be taking a look at. And it may be a project that we'll need to get pushed back to a future year.
Okay.
But again, we're just kind of in the design portion of that, since we're not moving the existing home.
Okay, thank you. Yep. Sorry about all the jumping back and forth.
Nope, you're good. Thank you.
All right, Tammy, if that was the end of it, Matt, at one point I saw your hand up and I saw it go down. Did you have something you wanted to say, or are you good?
I'm good. I'm good, Mike. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Appreciate that. So once again, this item was for informational purposes only. We've had a lot of discussion. Is there any further council discussion? Nope. Okay, Matt, I see your hand again.
Just a real quick note of thanks to staff. Can tell a lot of work went into that. Certainly a lot of unknowns in the current economic environment. And I just want staff to know that I appreciate the challenges that brings to planning, and good work. Thank you.
All right, Matt, thank you. And then Kurt, I see your hand up.
Yeah, just last point. So to Lisa's point, I just wanted to follow up. If both of us are concerned about that one project, and not that it has to be done in the next year, but I just want to, Caitlin, how do we try to move that on to the CIP? That's the final question for you. And thank you.
Yeah, why don't I give you a summary of kind of the notes that I've taken, and maybe I can just get a virtual head nod from this group. Looking into the Gleason Road project, especially that area around that one lane bridge, what kind of project that would look like, project costs, just to make that area a bit more safer. Additionally, Claire and Mize, maybe some, I don't want to say minor, but minor improvements to those roads to make them safer as well, what that would look like. And then also, apologies, Tammy, you're correct, remove that community center line item from the fiber build out project. So with that, we can bring those items back to the, I guess, June 8th meeting for discussion.
Sounds good to me. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Kurt. Tammy, I see your hand up again. Go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick statement. I would really encourage all of our council members to drive out on Mize Road around Mize Elementary, and that is a concerning place. Kids are walking and there's no sidewalks. It's just kind of it's a problem, a disaster actually waiting to happen, and we have the opportunity to fix that. And if there's a heightened need, I would like to see something around Mize Road and sidewalks around the elementary school. Put as priority. Those are our kids, and I think we're better than that. And when it comes to something like that, I think that needs to truly take the time, go out there and drive by Mize Road and have a look. And if that's your child walking on that street, I don't think anyone would support delay or anything when it comes to that area. So those are I don't live in the area, but I've been out there many times, and it is very concerning.
All right. Thank you, Tammy. Lisa, I saw your hand up again. Go ahead.
Yes, I do live in the area. My son attends Mize Elementary. It is around the corner from my neighborhood, and there is no safe way for any of the many children in my neighborhood to walk there. It's actually a twofold problem. It's a combination of Mize and where 79th Street meets Mize, and that affects both Shawnee residents as well as Lenexa residents that live in Gleason Glen. So thank you for pointing that out, Tammy and Kurt. Very important.
Awesome. Thank you, Lisa. Appreciate that. So I do not see any other hands up from council. Is there anyone there from the public that would like to speak to this?
There is not.
Thank you. So that concludes our agenda. At this point, I will accept a motion to adjourn.
Adjourn.
Second.
That sounded like Eric making the motion. The second was
Miss Thomas.
Amy Thomas. Okay. I have a motion and a second on this item. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed, nay. All right. Motion passes. We are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.